Good evening. We will make a start because Roger's all over the place. We'll make a start because it is 7:30. The dogs have joined us again. Roger's never far away without the dogs by his side. Good evening and welcome to another BIBBA webinar. Tonight's webinar is a Q&A session for progressive beekeepers. What is a progressive beekeeper? Somebody who has had a few seasons beekeeping and wants to move their beekeeping along a little bit, perhaps try something a little bit different, try something a little bit new, and basically soak up the knowledge that these two old men have got. I nearly swore then. These two old gimmers have got, and we're very grateful because not only have they got all that experience, but they're willing to share it. And so they're here live on YouTube. Welcome. Good evening to you both.
Good evening.
So we've had a few questions that have come in, but I am going to welcome questions from people who are in the Zoom meeting, and if I manage to be able to look in the YouTube chat as well, I'll try my best to juggle all of them because we've only had a few questions that have come in. So if you've got a burning question that you want to ask Roger or Peter, please put that in the chat, address that to me. I'm listed as BIBBA webinar, and we'll get those questions put to Roger and Peter. First one, this one's an interesting one that came in. This chap has melted down frames over the years to extract the wax from his old frames, but he wants to know what is it that's left behind. How does he? What would you call the skeleton of the cells as built by the bees? What exactly is this? It can't be wax as it doesn't melt. Is it propolis?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, it's generally called sort of slum gum. That's probably an American term, but yeah, I think there's an awful lot of propolis in it, Richard.
If it's brood frames, could be cocoons.
Yeah.
But slum gum is probably as good a name as anything.
Yeah.
I'm right in saying that when the larvae is developing and it's starting to pupate, it spins a cocoon, which is left behind on the cell walls. And depending on how old and black those combs are, depends how thick that cocoon shell that's left behind is.
Yeah, don't throw it away. I know it's not in the question, but don't throw it away. Wrap it up in something like newspaper, wrap it up really tight, and it's good for lighting fires.
Top tip. I've used some in bait hives as well because it's still got the smell of brood in there as well.
Yeah, don't set fire to them though.
They make a good. Okay, our next question. Apart from replacing the queen, is there anything I can do about chalkbrood in the hive? Peter, do you have any problems with chalkbrood in?
Not really. I find, replacing the queen does get rid of it, but it's not something that bothers us too much. I don't think it's. I haven't had no Roger experience, but I haven't had ongoing problems with it. It seems to disappear on its own, and it's not something to get too excited about. Not unless it's serious, but I've never had it really serious. So I don't know is the answer to that, but I haven't done anything about it. Replace the queen, will clear it up, or the bees might supersede. But it's not something I've lost a lot of sleep of over the years. What about Roger?
Well, chalkbrood's a really odd one because you can do all sorts of little experiments, and you can come up with answers that you don't expect. Probably knocking on for 40 years ago now, a man called Professor Len Heath did a lot of work down in Plymouth on it and on chalkbrood, and I don't think he came to a sensible answer because I think there were just so many variations. There are things that aggravate it. Poor nutrition is one of them, which is why you get the problems in the spring because, of course, the colony's racing away. And they're trying to build up, so you get a sort of imbalance between the amount of brood that needs feeding and the bees to feed it. So of course you could probably say that the brood is slightly underfed. That does give problems. But I've done all sorts of strange things over the years to try and sort it out. Well, not sort it out myself, but, you know, to try and find out a bit about it. And I've taken really bad combs of chalkbrood and put it in a hive with no chalkbrood at all. And the bees have cleaned it out and it hasn't created chalkbrood. So, you know, it's a very difficult thing to do. I remember several years ago, probably 10 or 12 years ago now, at Whisper Green, we were doing some queen rearing and we had a really good queen from a really good colony. And she was producing a chalkbrood. And it actually got worse during the season, which is rather unusual. It tends to go the other way around. So it got to the point where there was just so much brood being lost that we decided that we were going to requeen it. And then some bright spark, who obviously wasn't me, said, well, how about raising queens from that and then seeing what happens, which is actually what we did, because you wouldn't normally do it, and you certainly wouldn't suggest to people to do it. So it's a teaching apiary. We're going to learn. So, of course, everyone thought we raise queens from that lot. We're probably going to lose a high percentage of them, and the daughters are going to produce chalkbrood. Out of a bar of 10, we had 8 queens that started laying, which is very high at the best of times. Not one of them produced chalkbrood, and this one, the mother of this one was so bad that we were going to hoof her out. So there's a lot more to it than I think meets the eye. I know the common advice is to requeen. I'm not quite so sure that is always going to solve the problem. In getting around the country quite a bit, I find there are some places with virtually no chalkbrood at all. Also, if you, I've known of bees or queens that have been moved around from one area to another, where they come from, virtually no chalkbrood, but where they go to, they pick it up. Now, what's going on there, I don't know. It might just be there's a different strain in a different area that the bees from that queen are susceptible to. I don't know. Obviously, Len Heath did a lot of work on it 40 years ago, and he still didn't come up with the answer. So perhaps there really is a lot more to it.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you. And you covered a follow-up question about can location play a part in chalkbrood?
Well, I would think possibly nutrition as well. Roger touched on nutrition. I think something we tend to suffer from these days is a lack of forage for the bees, or lack of variety of forage for the bees at any specific time of year, which is, like Roger said, in the spring. And I think where we get acres and acres and acres of monoculture, sort of oilseed rape or something like this, they get one sort of pollen. And I think that there is probably deficiency in nutrition of some vitamins or whatever, right? But it's beyond my level of understanding. But I think monoculture is lack of variety of forage, I would think is probably a factor.
That might not be just a forage, Peter. I'll tell you why. Because a couple of years ago, I helped out with doing sort of citizen science bit of a research project, and I collected pollen from 4 colonies, 2 at the Whisper Green apiary and 2 of my own. And you would normally expect the pollen colours to be fairly similar within the same apiary at the same time. Were they? No, they weren't. The bees had locked into different sources, and some of them were sort of all the same colour in the tray. Others were lots of different colours. Now, one thing I suppose I should have done was to check the chalkbrood situation in both of those, but of course I didn't think about it at the time. So that's all from me, Richard.
Excellent. So the next question comes in from Guy.
We can hardly hear you, Richard.
Oh, right. Okay, hang on. Bear with. What's happened there? That any better?
Yep.
Super. The next question comes in from Guy. He would like to know why Roger likes undersupering during. Why you don't like undersupering during the winter or over the winter period. I think what Guy's trying to say is where you put a super underneath the brood box to overwinter the bees.
Yeah, well, if you want me to answer, I suppose he's directed the question to me. That is actually not undersupering. It's the wrong terminology. Undersupering is when you put the supers on, you put the fresh ones underneath the existing ones, so immediately above the brood chamber. That is what real undersupering is, and oversupering is the opposite, which is putting the supers on top. The modern practice of putting supers underneath the brood chamber for the winter has now erroneously been called undersupering. But okay, let's get out of the way of that. Right, nobody has yet given me a sensible reason why it should be done. And I think there's quite a bit of confusion too. It's only really been done for the last 15 years or so, I suppose. It wasn't done previous to that. I've even heard people say if you put a super of food underneath the brood, the bees can get at it. Well, if you put it on late, let's go back a bit. Bees naturally have food above them, not underneath them. You know, that's how bees live naturally. They definitely don't have brood underneath them. Otherwise, it would. If you think about it, the easy way to manage them is put the supers underneath, the brood chamber on top, and then you haven't got to take the supers off to get at the brood. But what will happen, of course, is the bees will take the food and put it above. Well, if that's the reason for doing it, then why not just put the super above anyway? And I'm sorry, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I keep coming across 3, 4, perhaps half a dozen reasons for doing it. If you're in a very cold, windy area and you put an empty box underneath the existing brood chamber, I can understand that, but I can't really understand putting a super of combs underneath. I tend to keep my queens out of my supers if I possibly can, and I think probably what will happen in the spring if you leave it a bit too late is the queens start laying in the supers, and then of course you open the supers up for wax moth or greater wax moth problems.
Yeah. If I can come in there, I think you've got to cast your mind at what the bees do in nature. The bees in nature, they store the honey in the comb above the brood. All right, so bees don't normally store honey below the brood. Right? So if you want to manage bees successfully, you've got to work with the bees. You start fighting against the bees, and you're on a loser before you start. Now, if you put the food below, then the bees are not going to. They're going to want to move it up if it's warm enough. It's not natural. If you work with the bees, right, you're going to get more honey, and you're going to get best success, and you get less stress for the bees, less stress for yourself. So, to me, putting a super of food underneath the brood chamber for the winter it's a mug's game. You don't want to do that. For example, if the bees feel that there's room above the brood and below the food, they won't tend to raise swarm. They won't feel that they're crowded. They tell me that the people in New Zealand manage their big colonies on a single brood chamber by always keeping above the excluder what they call a sticky, which is an empty extracted super, drawn out super. So then the bees see this empty cells above them, and they don't feel that they're crowded. So they feel they've always got space. And that, to my mind, is working with the bees. Putting a superfood below the brood is nonsense to me.
Yeah, if you get in the autumn, Richard, and the bees don't take the food up, what is going to happen is once you start getting frost, the bees are then going to cluster in where the brood is, abandon the food, and leave themselves wide open for wasps, because wasps these days, well, 30, 40 years ago, certainly in my area, you very rarely saw wasps in December. Now you're seeing them in January and February. And individually, they're actually quite tough, a lot tougher than bees. And I think they'll just go in and plunder what food is there. And
the other thing is, when you've got guard bees guarding the entrance of your hive, right, they only guard the entrance. Yep. Anything that comes through the entrance, inside the hive, the guard bees will ignore. Yep. So once them wasps, if you've got a super of food below where the bees are clustering, then any wasps that come in there, they're going to plunder that, and the bees won't defend. They'll rob the whole hive out in very short order, you know. So I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. These things come around every so often, and they appear logical. It's a lot of it is false logic. And I always say to people, if you try something different, try it on half your hives and see how you get on. Don't do it on all of them, and then you've got some sort of comparison.
So the next question then is, many people this winter have had unexpected losses, no signs of disease or starvation. What else can we do as beekeepers to prevent this from happening? Roger?
Yeah, this has happened in Whisper Green to two very experienced beekeepers. They both lost colonies only in the last couple of weeks. First off, in fact, I did give a warning at the BIBBA AGM. I haven't seen either of them, but from what I'm told and listening to the beekeepers now and chatting to them, it's pretty certain it's a Varroa issue or virus issue. So I think that's what the issue is. So if you've not treated, then I suspect that's what it is. Even if you have treated, don't forget the autumn was warm. If you've got what I call prolific bees, the queens are just going to keep laying throughout the winter. Up go your Varroa levels, and of course that gives you problems. If you've got what one might term locally adapted bees, then I think they'll probably have a brood break, which of course slows Varroa down. So I think that's probably why people are having the problems. Have a look in the brood area, and if there is any brood, you may well see that the tongue, the sort of half uncapped with the tongues hanging out, and that is a sure sign in my book of parasitic mite syndrome. And I suspect that is what's happening. But of course, it's the same old thing. Unless you actually see the colony, you don't know. It could be isolation starvation, but then you see the signs of starvation anyway.
Anything that you want to add, Peter?
Not really, as Roger said. Unless you've seen it, it's very difficult from here to decide what it is. But Varroa is an issue, and people tell me that they haven't treated for Varroa, but they haven't checked for Varroa. And I think you really need to keep a mercenary eye on Varroa, and the only surefire way is alcohol wash. And with alcohol wash, you're 100% sure of what the count actually is, and treat appropriately or not treat, which is what I do. Varroa isn't the threat now that it was 30 odd years ago when it turned up first, but it is still a threat, and it comes and goes in waves. It's you think, well, I went through a period I didn't treat at all for about 5 years, and all of a sudden it just reared its head and it came back with a vengeance. So you just need to keep a mercenary eye on it, as I say.
Yeah, I think the two people in my area have got locally adapted bees, so they probably had a brood break. But if you haven't got a brood break, of course, you aggravate the situation.
Next question then is, I have a queen. She looks good with a small colony of bees. She does not seem to be laying eggs, and there's no eggs or brood in any stages. Any thoughts? Peter, what would you be thinking?
Without seeing it is hard to tell, but it sounds to me like the queen is a dud. There should be something there. If they got enough food.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, if they haven't got food and they haven't got pollen, then of course they can't raise brood. But even with no pollen, I guess they're probably laying eggs. It seems that there's a problem with a queen. Is there any indication where they live?
No. But Eric, if you want to send in, just check that he's not.
Well, okay, then let me carry on and hope he gives us a chance to find out. Right, if you've got a queen off lay, if you can feed the colony, that generally triggers off her laying. It's a trick that happens usually towards the end of the season rather than at the beginning of the season. But it might be worth giving it a crack. And I mean syrup, not fondant. You need the bees to think they've got a little bit of a flow going on. Now, I suppose you could do the same by uncapping half a frame of food if you can, and just see what happens.
Apparently, Eric lives in Norfolk. There is food available, and they have access to candy pollen, which I presume is a pollen substitute.
Yeah, candy pollen. Yeah, yeah. I have to say, in early April, it's not looking too good.
No,
I think you've got a dud queen.
Okay. I need advice on how to manage a strong colony that has mild symptoms of chronic bee paralysis virus. Has been present for a couple of months, but currently only 5 to 10 affected bees exiting the hive on warmer days. He's got 5 more colonies arriving in 2 weeks. Apart from equipment hygiene, any advice on how to avoid it spreading to the new colonies? And can the colony with chronic bee paralysis virus be used to make splits?
Number one suspect is a Varroa. Right? Do a oxalic acid dribble and see what the mite drop is before you decide on anything. That's what I do. But Roger, what do you think?
Yeah, chronic bee paralysis virus has reared its ugly head since Varroa, so it's probably Varroa related. But we don't actually know very much about it, and to the best of my knowledge, there's no recommended treatment. I have seen bad cases just not get any better; they just get worse and the colony dies out. As far as passing on to another colony, I think probably it is likely to be done through Varroa, although contact is, I understand, an issue, and especially close contact. So if you've got a hive that's really packed with bees, you're much more likely to pick it up. But I think the answer is that we don't actually know very much about it. or put it another way, nobody's found a cure. Nobody's found a cure for it. I guess it will probably be management in some way, but it is a virus which can be notoriously bad to deal with.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I know that when I think you were there as well, listening to the lecture given by Giles Budge on chronic bee paralysis virus, he was saying that some of the bee farmers were using a shake 'em high, make 'em fly method, and he said that he didn't think. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Roger. He said that the science was telling them that it wasn't as effective as they're thinking it was being. So there's still an awful lot of research going on into it, isn't there?
Well, I think the virus is still there, whichever way you look at it. I think that's a real problem. But what I have noticed, and I've mentioned this to the scientists, but nobody, I suppose, they don't take any notice because it is anecdotal, and they get so much rubbish from beekeepers that they'll be chasing their tails if they're not careful. So perhaps they think everything is rubbish. But what I've noticed, and this is obviously only anecdotal, but I've seen it worse in hives that have got Hoffman spacing than either metal or plastic ends or castellations. Now, we're fairly certain that close contact and crowding has got something to or aggravates it. Now, if you think about it, and this is where I came from, Hoffman spacing or British Hoffman spacing and Langstroth are 35 millimeter centers. Gadent is 38. Castellations and plastic and metal ends are 38. Now the gap between, the width of a comb with worker brood both sides is spot on 25 millimeters. So you get 10 millimeters gap between the faces of the cappings in the seam between the combs on Hoffman spacing, 13 millimeters on castellations. So that's 30% more gap. Now, if you get two bees back to back, I think probably the answer is, or my thinking is rather, that the bees are rubbing against each other less, so there may be less transfer. But that is only guesswork. But that's what that observational. I've noticed it worse in colonies with Hoffman spacing than either castellations or metal or plastic ends.
Right, chaps, so you're ready for this one. I'm a member of a group trying to raise AMM queens in an isolated mating apiary. We're having some very good stock of native AMM, but we would benefit greatly from increasing the number of drones in the mating station. If all the drones raised in each colony are identical, then testing any emerging drones morphometry will reveal the colony's AMM origins. The question is there any morphometric parameters of drone AMM known, recorded, and available to test against? I presume, although I'm not 100%, we know what the wing patterns of workers look like for AMM, so we can look at those under a microscope and compare wing patterns for workers. But can we do that with drones?
To the best of my knowledge, there are no figures. I've certainly not seen any. I think wing morphometry is reckoned these days only to be accurate. The purer the sample is, you can very easily get heavily mongrelized samples that will give you almost whatever you want. So so I think that is an issue. Got to be fairly careful what I say, because I've got no scientific evidence for it. But that's my understanding of it. But I don't think there are are any figures for drones?
Okay. One for Adam Tofilski, who gave us a talk on morphometry last year, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. But with visual characteristics, even the scientists disagree. So I say much as haven't got much of a chance, have we?
Keith and Heather are wanting to know, they've been reading up about various bee diseases, and they're surprised that there's very little information, even on BBase, about what to do if a colony develops Nosema. Can Peter and Roger explain how they would deal with a colony that has signs of Nosema? I would rather have a plan prior to it ever coming across it than when it becomes a problem.
Have they actually got Nosema in their bees or not?
It doesn't sound like it. It sounds, because they've put, I would rather have a plan prior to ever coming across this problem.
Oh, okay, yeah. Peter, your move.
It's not something I've come across. I find that bees, if you keep them in a clean, dry hive, and there's no damp, and keep them healthy, disease generally isn't a problem. Stressed bees, they're like people. Stressed people become ill, they're susceptible to various different flus and colds and all the rest of it. And bees are just the same. If they got good conditions and they're healthy in a nice, clean, dry hive, then disease are not the major problem. I've never had it. I've never had issues with Nosema in all these years. Not to the level where you're going to, take drastic action. So I don't know. I don't know is the short answer.
Well, of course, Peter and myself are old enough or been in beekeeping long enough to have seen Nosema cerani come, because of course we've got two species of Nosema now. Nosema cerani, I suppose, when they look back at the historical samples, it's probably been here 30 years, I should think. They do behave a bit differently, but Nosema's not my strongest point, because, like Peter, it's not been that much of a problem to me. When I first started keeping bees was in the winter of, soon after the hard winter of 62, 63. People imported a lot of yellowish bees, and the county beekeeping instructor that we had in West Sussex at the time, and at that time there were probably approaching 50 county beekeeping instructors. These were the people that were employed by county councils that basically did the teaching, and they were good, sound, solid, knowledgeable, experienced beekeepers. Ours in West Sussex, a man called Harry Thompson, he said that he'd never ever seen Nosema and acarine as bad as in the mainly yellow imports that have come in soon after the losses of 62, 63 winter. Within a very short space of time, like 4 or 5 years, all that had gone. But we were all warned about Nosema, what we should do, and acarine as well. And as far as I was concerned, it disappeared until about the mid-1970s. And I bought 40 colonies of bees off one of our beekeepers who went blind. 19 of them were package bees that he bought from the United States with, I think, Italian or Starline queens. I can't remember. All of those succumbed the following winter, the whole lot. I lost all 19 of them. And they're the only 2 instances that I've had of Nosema myself. I know other people have had them, and it generally tends to be the more yellowish bees. So my advice to the couple is that if you've got what one might term locally adapted bees, although they may have Nosema, I think it will be at very low level, and I don't think it will be an issue to them. How can they prevent it? Well, stay away from yellow queens, yellow bees. That will help. Of course, although I don't do it just for the sake of it, comb changes are going to be probably quite useful as well. So that's really all I can say, because I really myself haven't got that much experience. So I tend not to talk about things unless I've got a bit of experience of it.
I think it's important to point out, particularly for the American viewers amongst our viewership, in the UK, you're not allowed to use antibiotics in hives to treat for Nosema. So is it Fumidil B?
Fumidil B used to be used till about 15 years ago. I'm fairly certain I can still use it in the States and Canada, but I'm not sure. They really will have to check in their own.
But in the UK, since 2011, we've not been able to use that for treatment. So
no, that's right, and that was very effective if you had a bad case. The problem is, of course, people treated the bees and didn't requeen them. Didn't requeen the ones that were susceptible to it. But the thing I find interesting is that there was a lot of beekeepers treated with Fumidil B prophylactically, and since it's been banned, and it is banned, there hasn't been any rise in the problems. But we were told, oh, it's dreadful, can't have Fumidil B, all our bees are going to die, and they didn't.
This next question, and I need to apologise to Albert. He sent me an email. He's on the chat and he's asked the same question. He sent me an email 5 days ago, and it's been sat waiting for me to reply, and I just haven't got around to it. Snell Grove boards. He says he's a little unsure about the reasoning behind opening the gates on the board in a certain sequence. Can you explain a little bit more detail, please? Peter, have you ever used a Snell Grove?
Never used it. It's too much. Well, it looks to me like too much trouble. There are easier ways of achieving what you want. But if somebody's got 2 hives at the top of their garden and they want to experiment and faff about, then maybe that they could use it. But really, for practical beekeeping, it's not something I've even been interested in, to be honest.
Roger, swarm control?
I've never used them myself. I've seen people use them, and in fact, there was a beekeeper that I was asked to go and help advise, because he had 60 colonies. It was an apple orchard, and somebody suggested to him that he put everything on Snell Grove boards. And when I went into the orchards, I don't think I've ever seen as many swarms as I did when I saw that. I basically with Snell Grove board, all you're doing really is diverting bees from one box into another. That's really all you're doing, as a lot of these boards do. I've never even read Snell Grove's book, but I'm told that I was told that towards the end of his beekeeping life, even Snell Grove gave up on it. But whether that is correct or not, I don't know. What I believe he said, and this will need checking, what I believe he said was that it doesn't work on carniolan bees for some reason. Now, I know we should all challenge what we're told, so challenge that as well. But I'm not saying that is the case, but that worked. On the other hand, I was in the Isle of Man 3 or 4 years ago, and there was a beekeeper there with 14 colonies, and he just used Snell Groves as a matter of course. Whether the bees were swarming or not, he used Snell Grove boards. And he worked out how to use them, and he did really well. And I think out of 14 colonies, he got over half a ton of honey. So he was doing pretty well on that lot. So as far as the question is concerned, you open and close doors to divert bees from one entrance to another, which usually is going to be a different a different box. But that's really all I know about it.
And usually the doors that you have to open and close are the opposites to the side that you've been working on, so that bees returning come to the same side, and the new bees leaving are trained to the same area. Yeah, it's not straightforward. There is actually, and I'm not particularly plugging it, but there is quite a nice write-up on our own Barnsley Beekeepers Association website, with a nice some nice diagrams on there. But yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it?
Well, Horsley, who was a Yorkshireman, I think, or he operated in Yorkshire anyway, he came up with a simplification, and I think, but I'm not sure, Horsley had several out apiaries, and where the Snell Grove board is probably only good for bees at the top of your garden or bottom of your garden, whichever way you want to look at it. Horsley apparently used his in out apiaries, but again, I've never used a Horsley board. Yeah, it's both of them are on Cushman's website, so I really ought to know more about them. But like Peter, I've found other ways of doing things.
What's the best way to make five frame nuke for increase or to sell? Peter, how would you go about making increase to sell 5-frame nukes?
I've never made increase to sell, so I don't know.
Roger?
Right. Well, it depends whether you want to actually build them up to 5 frames or make them up as 5 frames and sell them straight away. Because there's going to be quite a bit of difference, because if the colony is building up, it's going to be in far better balance than if you just make it up out of various bits and pieces. If you my 2-frame nuke, starting off with 2 frames and let it build up would be quite a good way of doing it, but you've got to be careful about the nectar flows, because if you get a poor flow, you may well have a food shortage. If you get a good nectar flow, what you can end up with is the box full of nectar rather than balance. If you've got a 5-frame nuke for sale, in my view, it really ought to be in balance. And if you look at the BBKA website, there's a standard there. I think the number is L014. I should know a bit about it because I wrote it, but it was based on the earlier British standard one, and then I've sort of modified it a bit. Right. Personally, I would take frames from different colonies, and then you can get reasonable balance. So you can get at least one good frame of food, and if you're selling it, in my view, it ought to have at least 2 weeks food there. Now, of course, food is something which is going to be very variable, because if you've got all sealed brood in your combs, you're not going to need as much food as if you've got unsealed brood. So you need to take that into account. Don't forget the old variations, well, ratios rather, of 1, 2, and 4. So 1 of eggs, 2 of brood, and 4 of sealed brood. So try and get those right. If you've got bees from 2 or more, 3 or more colonies, you can just mix them together without any problems. And I think that's how I would do it. I would put a queen with it rather than a queen cell. So you need to raise queens. Please don't go buying imports and putting them in. Raise your own queens as well. And I think that's how I would do it. Of course, it depends how many you want to do. That's one way of doing it. Another way, you could probably build them up onto a double brood chamber, and then take the frames out of one. All out of one colony. That would be okay. Try to make sure you don't lose any flying bees, because that's one of the tricks of, or used to be one of the tricks of people that sold nukes in the old days that had bees that were a bit on a touchy side. You'd milk the flying bees off, so that the bees were nice and gentle when the new owner handled them. But a week later, they could be once they started flying, they could be a bit touchy. And back would come the complaint, oh, these bees are bad tempered. Right when they left here, Gov, you know. Yeah, I think that's what I would do, but I'd rather not somebody take our word for it just on here. I'd rather we had a bit more discussion, I think, because it could make quite a bit of difference. How many colonies or how many nukes a person wants to sell, their situation, the time of year, and who they're going to sell them to. In fact, but if they're going to sell them to a experienced beekeeper, you might do it slightly differently than if it was a beginner. If it was a beginner, I think they deserve something that's top notch. If you're selling, let's say, a dozen nukes to a experienced beekeeper, I think there could probably be just a little bit variable, a bit more variable. So perhaps a balance of sealed brood to unsealed brood might not be consistent throughout the batch.
I've shared your article on Roger Patterson method of increase as well, because I think that's quite useful for anybody who's interested on making increase. Next.
Yeah, so sorry. The book I've got out. What you can do, of course, another thing is, if you're doing it commercially, and I know this isn't a commercial a webinar, but what you can do is make a new cup early in the season, let it expand to sort of 8 frames, 9 frames, something like that. If you take a 5-comb nucleus away from that, it's balanced, perhaps from one side, let's say, so you get the combs of food. What you got left, you can put a queen cell with it, and then you can build that up and produce another one later on. So you probably get 2 nukes for the price of 1, really.
Excellent. Next line of questioning. Peter, what did you use for Varroa treatment last year?
I do oxalic dribble. Yeah, it depends upon how much of an infestation I've got. When I had really bad infestation, I used the apitraz strips, and then do the whole apiary with apitraz strips, and that cleared all of Varroa out. Follow the instructions. It's now approved in the last 3 years. I think it's now approved for use in this country, and because it's only just become allowed in this country, it was very effective. But since then, I monitor and if I don't treat in the autumn, then I treat in before Christmas with oxalic dribble. So that's me. And some bees haven't been treated in the past 12 months, and the Varroa count is very, very low, 1 or 2.
Thank you, Roger.
This last year, I treated prophylactically with Apigard, so everything. Well, yeah, everything apart from one apiary. and no dribble this year.
Okay, yeah. And the questioner kindly asks me as well. I used Apivar and Amitraz, and then a dribble on 1 or 2 colonies that needed it.
Yeah, rather than treating willy-nilly, I think the important thing is to monitor thoroughly. And people are very wary of killing 200 bees, but killing 200 bees is nothing as to the colony dying out. You've got a alcohol wash. You have got a genuine, accurate reading of your situation. And I think if you can keep the mite low below sort of 4 or 5 mites and 200 bees, then I think you're on a winner. But rather than treating willy-nilly, I think it's more important just to keep an accurate eye on what you actually got.
Yeah. Richard, I think we better point out that we got different situations, because you're semi-commercial, Peter's semi-commercial. Although I've got 25, 30 colonies of my own, so you could argue I'm semi-commercial, although I don't sell the honey. I'm also in a teaching situation, and the previous year I had very heavy losses because I didn't treat. If I didn't treat this last year, I could be down to very low numbers in the teaching apiary, and of course that isn't going to teach beekeepers. So I've had to treat, and that's why I treated prophylactically without checking, because in my view, if you treat one colony, you got to treat the lot.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to point out that whatever Varroa treatment you choose to use, you should always follow the label and the instructions and make sure that it's left in for the right amount of time and left in the right conditions.
Yeah, I think we really must expand on this, because we're back into geography again. I don't know where the questioner lives, but I've been told by people a bit further north than you, Richard, that Apigard doesn't work because the autumn temperatures get so low that it doesn't it doesn't work. Yeah, is it the same with you, Peter?
Yeah, you've got to be yes, you've got to be wary of the temperature. You've got to be be wary.
What's your altitude? Because I think that's probably the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, where I am, I've had Caris here today, Caris Edwards, and where she is and where I am, even though we're both in a marginal part of Wales, hers is much more marginal than mine, and her season is different. So you've got to, as you say, you've got to consider geography, and you've got to consider the climate as well. You know,
we've also got to consider something else, because we're giving advice here. I've never been to Heather, but I wonder what the beekeepers that their main crop is Heather, what they do, whether they can actually use Apigard because of the timing. I really don't know. You haven't got Heather, Peter?
I haven't. Well, there's not a lot of heather. You know, the heather area where my father used to go, it's all been decimated by farmers, you know, trashing it basically. And so what used to be huge expanses of purple is now is well, I don't know whether it's changed because the farming practices have changed, or whether the farming support system has altered. I don't know what it is, but it's all sort of ferns and weeds and gorse and you know, a lot of that area now. So it's not as much heather as it used to be.
Yeah. What about you, Richard? Are you too far south?
We do have a little bit of heather around, perhaps a 20 or 30-minute drive away from me.
Yeah. What do local beekeepers do then if they go to heather? What do they treat with?
Do you know, Roger? I'm not entirely sure. Not entirely sure.
Oh, you better edit that bit out then. When
Yeah, because yeah, don't look good, do I?
Not really, no. Nobody's going to take any notice of you ever again.
Well, if they did in the first place, absolutely.
Oh, well, yeah, I did.
Up until now.
Believe everything I'm told. I'm even going to write a book on it.
Right, okay, let's have a look at some of these questions. Peter, what kind of alcohol do you use when you're doing your alcohol wash?
Oh, it's a 90% or 85 or 90%. You buy it from eBay. I'll have to go get the bottle and show you.
It's probably isopropanol, is it?
That's the one.
Yeah, good job on me, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bloody good job you there. Don't know. Yes, yeah. Because somebody, when I first bought the thing, I got it from Thorns. The little thing you shake, put 200 bees in and shake it up. Somebody said you could use windscreen wash. I put windscreen wash in and it shook it all up, and nothing but a box full of froth. So that didn't work out very well.
Excellent. Phil wants to know if any of us are going to the BBKA Spring Convention and giving talks.
Well, I think I might go there, but I don't know if I'll talk to anybody.
I think, Peter, are you going?
Yes.
Yeah, so all of us will be there on the BIBBA stand. But
I've never given a talk there. Never been asked.
Yeah, they only ask people that know what they're talking about. That's the problem, I think.
How would you know?
Yeah, and I only talk to people who buy me beer.
I had a colony which I tried to supersede late in the year from a queen cell found in a hive, but no queen found in the spring and no eggs. What would you do with a hive of old bees in the spring?
Oh, God.
It depends how many colonies they've got. But if they've come through the spring, even you get into now, and it might appear to be quite a lot of bees. I really don't think they're going to live very long. If you've got another colony, then try and unite them or something like that. But other than that, it's
a write-off.
If you've got 20 colonies, it's terminal job, I think.
Okay, next question then.
Let's go back on. I've tried to save these sort of colonies and try to introduce queens to them, and it don't work. They seem to be. I suppose the lane workers have developed or started to develop, and they just don't
they don't want a queen.
Queens.
No.
Yeah.
Some colonies use a lot more food than others during the winter. Why is that?
Because they're the wrong bees for the area.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. Obviously you've got to take into account the size of the colony. But if they're roughly equal sizes, I think the answer is that the more prolific ones are queens, which just lay, and of course it just goes for the food. Because of course, where they evolved, or their ancestors evolved, they weren't used to the long winters that we get. So that's what I think.
Yeah.
I once looked after 4 colonies of bees for a man, and he, although he wasn't a beekeeper as such, he knew a lot more than most non-beekeepers, and he insisted on buying at the time New Zealand queens every year, and they were these bright yellow lemony sort of thing. Some people call them satsumas, and I fed them, and I just did a sort of November sorry, December check. In fact, I think I was going to do oxalic acid, and I hefted them. I thought, crikey, they're light. Looked inside, 4 full frames of brood. And the others had got nothing. They'd gone off lay. So of course, there wasn't any point treating for Varroa, but that's the reason they were light. And from memory, all 4 of those colonies would have been dead within a couple of weeks if I hadn't have checked them. So that is a reason. Now, if you raise your own queens from your own colonies, you tend not to got that sort of thing. But especially if you buy a queen from here, buy a queen from there, buy a queen from somewhere else, they're very variable. Or you take in swarms and then don't requeen them. But I think that will be is likely to be the answer.
Yeah.
Next question. What stage of development should I move a queen cell into a nuke or a hive to emerge? So this person's raising queens by the sound of it, and they want to know at what stage they should move that sealed queen cell into the prepared nuke or hive ready for emergence.
The closer it is to hatching, the more robust it's going to be, is less delicate it's going to be. But I have moved cells successfully into nukes quite early on. They reckon that you should leave it until the last day or 2 before they hatch. But for reasons when I've had to go away and things like this, I moved them several days earlier, and I got away with it. I don't know what Roger thinks about that.
Yeah, same as Peter, really. If you're raising queens, what I call artificially, so the usual methods, gender cut, kit grafting, cell punch, or whatever, you've got a pretty good idea when they should emerge. They might pinch half a day or perhaps a day, but that's all. They can be anything, in my experience, anything up to 4 days overdue and still emerge well. So you can't really say always that it's within a day or so of emerging. But after grafting or whatever, I generally leave it about 9 days. You can generally tell because in the last 24 hours, the bee starts thinning the tip of the cells down. But that doesn't always happen. Some bees, for some reason, don't do it. Now, of course, it becomes a problem when you've got natural cells, because you don't always know within a couple of days how old they are. And that's where, of course, experience comes in. But going on from what the questioner asks, I've transferred unsealed queen cells and got away with it. But of course, the further away you are from emerging, especially if you've had a laying queen in there or you've got young brood, of course, you run the risk of emergency cells. Now, if you've got, let's say, 4 days to go for the queen to emerge, what you can end up with is emergency cells sealed in that time. So the colony is likely to swarm on the queen cell that you put in.
Yeah.
And the emergency cell, a queen from that will take over. And this is one of the reasons, of course, why you should always only leave 1 queen cell, not the 2 that we're unfortunately often advised to do.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Well, let's go on just a tiny bit. If I've got the bees at home, 3 days after putting the queen cell in, I would check to see if, firstly, that one's emerged. If it has, you're going to be okay. If it hasn't, then rip out all the emergency cells. Otherwise, if the colony is strong enough and the weather's good, everything's right, there's, in my experience, probably 80% chance of getting a swarm.
Okay, to move on?
Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Okay, right. We'll leave you with this one then, this question. What's the one piece of advice that you would give to beekeepers who are keen to learn more about beekeeping? Roger.
Read Roger's book.
Which one? All of them, yeah. Cool. Right. I'm going to be shot for this one, I think. Well, I hope so anyway. I would say take more notice of the bees and some of the advice that comes from various places, because the bees will usually get it right. As I keep saying, the best teachers of beekeeping have got 6 legs and 4 wings, not 2 legs and no wings. So I think probably let the bees teach, or listen to the bees, watch them, observe them, call it what you like. I might think of something else in half hour's time, but that would be mine.
Absolutely, I can't disagree with any of that. It doesn't matter how many books you read and how many people you talk to and how many professors and universities you've been to, the bees will always teach you something. Bees will always know best. They'll always surprise you after all these years.
Excellent. We are 3 plus lots of other members of BIBBA, the trustees, will be at the Spring Convention this weekend. So please do come along and say hello. But if you're really wanting some quality lectures, Joe Widdicombe, who is also a trustee, is speaking twice at the BBKA Spring Convention. Once on Friday about the National Bee Improvement Programme, and then on Saturday he's speaking about commercial beekeeping with dark bees. So those are two lectures that, if you're around, are worth seeing, particularly the second one, because I know lots of commercial and semi-commercial people do wonder about whether or not dark bees can be profitable from a commercial standpoint. Well, Joe will tell you how he's made his millions from working with dark bees on Saturday. Roger and Peter, thank you very much for being so hospitable and answering so many questions. We've got Peter Sutcliffe coming up next week, I believe. And then the week after, we've got Yvonne Kilvington from Ashbrow School. And then towards the end of April, we've got a Q&A session with the NatBIP subcommittee about the National Bee Improvement Programme. So that's another one to look out for. But for this evening, thank you very much.
Excuse me, Richard, can I do a plug for Live at the Hive?
Oh, you can.
Yeah. Well, you know more better than I do, really. Yeah, we will be starting Live at the Hive again. Can't obviously we've got to do it in the either evenings or weekends. So the evenings aren't light enough just at the moment, or they're not warm enough. Won't be able to do anything this coming weekend because of the Spring Convention. And the following weekend is Easter. If I can get people to help out on Easter, we'll try and do it then. So you better tell them about registering, Richard.
Yeah, so if you are a BIBBA member, we'll be sending out information to you. If you are a NatBIP subscriber, we will send information out to you. If you are a BIBBA member, make sure that you've signed up for the WhatsApp group, because that is the quickest way for us to tell you whether or not it's happening because of the weather down where Roger is. But yeah, keep your eyes peeled on your inboxes. If you're not receiving BIBBA communications and you think that you should be, drop me a line at secretary@bibba.com and I'll check out why that might be. But from me in Yorkshire, Peter in Wales and Roger in West Sussex, good night and see you soon.
Yeah, good night, everyone.
Yeah, cheers.